Hello, I'm Natasha Gutierrez. Welcome to Rappler Talk. With me is lecturer in international communication at the University of Leeds, Jason Cabañas. Jason was a co-author of the study on architects of disinformation here in the Philippines. Jason, welcome to Rappler.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for speaking to us.
Yes.
So let's start with the basics for those who don't know you and don't know about your very interesting study. Let's talk first about what the study is about and how you got interested in it in the first place.
Right. So this study called Architects of Network Disinformation is a research report that we came out with maybe a couple of months ago, but it's actually part of a broader research network that takes a look at technologies for development. And one of the streams in our Tech for Dev network, in the Newton Tech for Dev network, is on digital labor. So we were taking a look at the kinds of work that people do here in the Philippines that have to do with the digital. And it was in the course of doing research around that we stumbled into these so-called disinformation producers or political quote-unquote trolls. Yeah.
And what was interesting to you about these trolls, these political trolls and fake accounts?
Yeah. I think what's quite fascinating with the Philippine case is how at the heart of it are really these people who come from the ad and PR industries. And they bring the techniques of advertising and PR into the realm of digital disinformation. And they're very, very adept and very good at it. And I think what's important is that in the case of the Philippines in particular, we have a kind of politics that's not very strong on party ideologies, right? So we're very much image-oriented. And you see why advertising and PR is quite central to that, because it has to do with branding particular politicians and also branding specific policy issues.
So what you're saying is that the ad and PR industry is very much involved in the disinformation campaigns in the political industry in the Philippines.
Yes, but I'm not, of course I won't say that it's the entire ad and PR industry. It's a certain aspect or a certain strand of the ad and PR industry. And in particular, these are people who used to work in advertising and PR and who fashion themselves as political strategists, or they might have like a local boutique ad agency, and then they also do work with political clients.
Okay.
So it's a very specific sector within that broader field of advertising and PR.
Okay, and how did you mentioned you stumbled upon this. How did you stumble upon this? Was this something that you heard in the grapevine and then sort of found out it was true, or during your course of study, it slowly surfaced or came out?
Yeah, so while we were talking to some of the digital workers, some of them revealed that they do this kind of disinformation work on the side. And so we decided to see how we could get in touch with the people who actually do this kind of work. And we began with our broad network of friends, because both of us are communication researchers, and so very well connected in terms of the field of media and communication in general. And so, yeah, within our network, we first got to interview those people whom we call the chief architects of network disinformation. So these are the people at the top of the disinformation architecture or infrastructure.
So those were the first people that you sort of had met or spoken to?
Yes.
And when you say digital laborers, and who are also involved in disinformation on the side, what is the actual work of the digital laborers aside from the disinformation?
Right. So a lot of the digital laborers who are part of this, within the hierarchy, so you'd have like the ad and PR executives at the top, the chief architects, and then at the middle level, we have what we call the digital influencers. So these are people who actually have like, it's their mainline jobs. Okay, they might actually be working in call centers. They do search engine optimization work. They do marketing for for digital.
So they're familiar with the digital industry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then on the side, they would have what we call quote accounts. These are accounts on Twitter and on Facebook, or sometimes they say 360, so around social media.
Okay.
They're often quotes that have like, share inspirational words, words of wisdom, prayers, jokes. snarky humor, those kinds of things. And each of these accounts have an organic following of around 50,000 to 2 million people. So once you hit those numbers, that's when the chief architects kind of approach and say, do you want to use your account for political campaigns?
I see. And these digital influencers and these quote accounts, do people know who is behind these quote accounts, or are they just sort of accounts that are literally just for inspirational and we don't know who's behind them?
Right. This is why we've kind of focused on them, because a lot of the conversation has focused on what we call key opinion leaders, like maybe Mocha Uson and Jover Lorio. So these people whom we know who are there front and center. But in our research, what we wanted to do was to see how this is actually quite normalized and professionalized, how this information is just there hiding in the background, so to speak. So a lot of these accounts are not explicitly political. And I'm sure many of the people watching now would be following some of these accounts because they share funny jokes, humorous insights, things like that, memes. And then it's just they sneak in the political content organically afterward. So it takes actually careful planning to do that, to bring in political campaigns that are in line or that feel very organic to that particular account. Yeah. So if, for example, you would do something that's more about positive branding, like just burnishing the name of a politician, you would use like digital influencer accounts that are quite positive in their image. But if you were going to do like a digital black ops, like attack a particular politician or attack a particular policy, then you'd use the snarky kind of accounts for that as well.
Okay, so this is all very fascinating, obviously, and you mentioned the chief architects, who you said may have boutique agencies, more executives of PR and ad agencies. And then you have your digital influencers who you're saying use their quote accounts for, I guess, memes and influential content. And what comes next?
At the bottom of like the paid hierarchy would be those whom we call the community level fake account operators. So these are people who are not required to be as creative as the digital influencers, because the influencers, what they do is they kind of translate the strategy into popular vernaculars, and in particular into gay speak, which seems to resonate a lot with Filipino culture because it's funny and you know it's something that people relate with. But those at the bottom, they're just given a common script, and they're just supposed to like and retweet and repost stuff, and for X numbers of shares or likes or retweets, they get a certain payment for that. So there's some payment matrix that they do for that. So these people, I would say, are the most reluctant in terms of the work that they do. And it's sad because they're the ones who are actually doing a lot of the amplification work, but they're not super happy with what they do. So a lot of these people, for instance, are university students from the regions just trying to earn their tuition. Or it could be, again, digital workers, but perhaps in more precarious kinds of work. Their salary isn't enough, so they have to do these things. Some of them also work for offices of particular politicians, and this can go from local to national. So they have dreams of making it in politics. So they have their mainline jobs with the chief of staff, but then they're also asked to troll on the side if they want to get promoted.
Very fascinating. So university students, what other industries are these community level?
So mostly university students, call center workers, and also people who work with the chief of staff of particular politicians, from the local to the national.
Okay, and you mentioned extra earnings. Do these depend on the number of likes they get, number of shares, number of engagement?
Yeah, and this is why we kind of say as well in our study that even though the chief strategists, the chief architects of network disinformation begin with a very clear strategy and a clear campaign message, and they use the techniques of ad and PR for that, doing brand Bibles, for instance, determining which social media you'd bring out your particular messages. But once you go to the digital influencers and then to the community level fake account operators, because they need to amplify the reach, the message gets a bit more volatile. We call it volatile virality. becomes quiet, viral, but at the same time, the central message isn't completely controlled anymore. And how does it become viral? They use now a lot of misogyny, anti-intellectualism, toxic language. So in our report, we call it like a performance of populism.
Okay.
And so this is what amplifies the kind of, it fans the flames in a way in social media. And they would say that, we're not the ones who are actually vitriolic. They pass it on to the supporters of politicians, but really their role is to like really fan those flames. And also to pass on like revisionist narratives, change how we view our history in view of like maybe future elections as well.
So let's say I want to be one of these, what they call them, community level...
Fake account operators.
Fake account operators. Let's say I want to be part of this hierarchy. I want to earn extra money on the side. Would I then receive instructions? Would I be, you're talking about the styles and techniques that they use, the language and all of that to go viral. Is there sort of a handbook or a guidebook on how to do it and how to spread, how to make things go viral?
For the community level fake account operators, it's just really following a common script. Their role is to amplify.
Okay. And it's up to you how you do it.
Yeah, but there's not a lot of creativity involved in there. And in fact, when they're hired, they're often obviously the call for jobs is not for trolls, but for some other kind of like
what is
call
usually
center.
the call out?
It's a call center job.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And then it turns out to be a trolling kind of operation. But it's really the digital influencers who are quite interesting here because they're the ones who have the talent and the skill to, like I say, use popular vernacular. In their own speak, and I'd speak a little bit in Tagalog, they'd say, kailangan badingin or baklain, baliin the message that the chief strategists have come out with.
Okay, okay, I see. Okay. Obviously, this is all very fascinating. So if anyone has questions, feel free to tweet us, and I will make sure to keep an eye on the account. But let's continue. Okay, so those are the 3 levels of the paid hierarchy.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And is there another level?
And I think this is really crucial to say as well, is that there's a porous boundary between these paid disinformation producers and the people below, the grassroots intermediaries, for instance. So these are the actual leaders of, political supporters. They could also be fan club, community heads, celebrity, fan groups. They're the leaders of these things, and they're the ones. In some ways, it's hard. It's sometimes difficult to tell apart the influencers, the community level fake account operators from them because they can be fans of their political client too. So there's a very porous boundary there, and these grassroots intermediaries are the ones who actually encourage. At the very bottom level, the supporters, and the supporters are real. And what they do is they really tap into the sentiments of these supporters, and that's their talent.
Yes.
The sentiments are real, and the support is real, and what they do is they tap into those using popular vernaculars, using the populist performances that I've been talking about.
Yes.
But the thing is that in principle, it's a good thing. You air out the concerns of people, you expose or give them a platform to say what they feel and speak what they want to say about politics. But the thing is that in the end, their goal is to weaponize that.
Okay.
So they weaponize these sentiments towards their political opponents.
And that's when it becomes negative.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because of that weaponization that they do. So they do these things not in the service of a vibrant political discourse, but to weaponize the sentiments of supporters so that you silence other political camps.
Okay. Very fascinating, and actually explains a lot of why when, I guess for a certain particular post that is, let's say, critical of a specific politician, let's say, usually the comments are a mix of fake accounts and real people.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
Yeah, because the fake accounts are there in many ways to encourage people to speak up and to say their piece.
Okay.
So I think it's also important to say that because sometimes people talk a lot about bots. And in Western scholarship, there's a lot of discussion of that. But in the Philippines, at least, it's not really used as much based on our conversations with the architects of disinformation. They think of bots as kind of like, they use the Game of Thrones language. It's like White Walkers. They're so easy to see, so that they avoid doing that. although they still use it, they say that 20% of the following that you'd see, or the posts and the reposts and tweets and likes, would be bots, but 80% are organic followers.
80% are real.
Yeah.
Okay. You touched on this slightly. You said that the fake account operators are the ones who are most reluctant to do their jobs.
Right.
Let's talk about conscience in this
Yes.
hierarchy.
Yeah.
Who have you seen from speaking to all these, and as I understand, you've interviewed 20 people
Yeah.
from different parts of the hierarchy. How does the conscience spectrum, I guess, play
Right.
among these hierarchies? Who is the most reluctant? You mentioned that. And how do they justify this to themselves? And you mentioned that slightly also. It's a good thing to sort of voice out these sentiments for those who feel kind of,
Unheard.
unheard.
Yeah.
But what is the justification from those you talk to?
Right. In our research team, we call this the "How do you sleep at night?" question.
Okay.
So the moral justifications that they have, and they do have clear moral justifications. So for the chief architects of network disinformation, they really see themselves as the mavericks in this new field of digital political campaigning. So for them, they're the ones who will be displacing the old political strategists who don't know anything about digital. They say that these are like digital dinosaurs and don't really do digital campaigns very well, don't connect to the masses very well, or to the broad base of supporters very well. And so to them, they feel that they're changing this landscape, and they're here as the mavericks of this brand new field. So that's how they see themselves. But also part of what they do to kind of distance themselves from the work that they do is that they use the language of fictionalization.
Okay.
So for instance, to kind of distance themselves from the impact of what they do on our democracy and on our electoral politics, they'd say like, oh, I'm like the Olivia Pope of the digital world. So they use narratives, or sometimes they say I'm like an Olena Tyrell strategizing. So they fictionalize their whole experience so that it becomes less real.
And sort of more prestigious in a sense.
Yeah. And then they also gamify, which I think that's quite important. They don't see it as actual people being affected by what they're doing, but they're seeing it as a puzzle to be solved. And in some ways, this is rooted in how some people would approach ad and PR problems. You try to solve this image puzzle, and you don't really think about like what's the real world implication of that. Yeah, to you it's an interesting conceptual puzzle to be solved. So that's how they justify that.
it.
Yeah.
Is there a sense of pride among these people to have figured this out and to be able to, I guess, manipulate?
Yes, there is, and that's why they were quite keen to talk to us, and as long as we kept them anonymous, obviously, but for them to tell, like, these are the new strategies that we've developed, and we're using it in the digital, and hopefully be able to transpose that later on into the mainstream where ethics is, ethical regulations are tighter. So this is their experimental playground, in a sense. For the digital influencers, it's really a matter of financial security. That although they have okay jobs that pay okay, they want a little bit more security with the kind of work that they do. So this matters to them. And in some ways, it's this aspiration for a middle class lifestyle that the digital influencer work allows them to do, because they hobnob with politicians, with celebrities. And also sometimes when they do campaigns, this is really quite interesting. The chief architects would billet them in a 5-star hotel. And then they're going to stay there for 3 days. They can order whatever they want whilst they're doing the campaign, making something trend on social media. And then the person who gets like the highest reach or the greatest reach might be awarded an iPhone or a new iPad. So there's this middle class. You get to taste a little bit that middle class kind of lifestyle when you're doing this kind of work.
It's all very fascinating.
Yeah. And then but apart from that, the other reason, like I mentioned earlier, is that quite a number of them are gay and transgender.
Why does this matter?
And it's because they're quite good at translating.
It's the lingo.
Yeah, the lingo. They're very good at it. But at the same time, in terms of their own personal experience, some of them have degrees in fields that are maybe can be quite hyper-masculine in the Philippines, maybe in engineering or in the sciences. And they've had an experience of being discriminated as they try to make a career in those fields, and here they feel accepted because their skills are appreciated. So that's another reason that they come in. And also at the same time, they say that when you're doing corporate marketing, advertising, you actually also do a bit of deception work. You fudge the truth a little bit. So they hyper exaggerate that and say, hey, we do that already. So what's the difference between doing that for brands and doing that for politicians?
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you found that these people actually do believe in the politicians that they support or that they work for?
And that's another thing. They actually prefer to work for politicians that they believe in because it becomes a bit easier for them.
For the cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, to do what they do. So, but if they're offered, for example, a campaign of a politician they don't like, they fan that out to their other influencer friends who might be more interested.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned iPhones and hotels.
Yeah.
How much does one earn for something like this? From the top, how much would you be if you were an architect? And I would assume these architects, if they know so much about the digital field, they're not that old. What is the age group, and how much do they earn going down to the pyramid?
Right. So for the I guess it depends on the campaign because it's campaign based.
Okay.
So it's very project based.
Okay.
So we don't have a full sense of like how it might happen across the different projects. But the ones that we've encountered, just to give you one example, for a 3-day campaign, for instance, to push for a particular policy agenda in which they actually succeeded in pushing for. The whole package was 30 million pesos.
Wow.
And the bulk of that would go to the chief architect. And then the influencers maximum would get maybe 5,000 a day for a campaign. So if it's
Across
3 days,
it's 15,000.
yeah, if you're like the top influencer of the day. So it's a good salary. And then obviously at the bottom with the community level fake account operators, there's a matrix there. I think it's about 500 pesos for how many number of shares and likes. So it's less for the people down below. And so just to say as well that the motivation for the people at the bottom is really financial survival or career survival. They just have to do this because they want to be in politics and the chief of staff wants them to do this. And so they're super reluctant. And it's actually these people who shared with us their Facebook and Twitter accounts, maybe as a way to assuage their conscience as well, that they're working with researchers or revealing in some ways or exploring what it is that they do. So they opened up some of their accounts for us to see how they do it.
Again, really interesting stuff. Okay, we've gotten a question from Twitter, from Vault de Guzman. Has this been going on since the past administrations, or is an exclusive phenomenon immediately before, or is this exclusive phenomenon something that we've seen immediately before and during the Duterte administration?
I think this interest in the digital and trying to tweak it and weaponize the digital happened even before the Duterte administration. But we see the culmination of it in the recent elections, where you see the power of the digital becoming harnessed quite well. But now I think the focus has actually shifted. It's not about electoral politics. It's the everyday campaigning for particular ideas or for pushing for a particular image of politicians and policies. So I think that's what's actually more interesting. It's beyond the elections. It's really shaping how we talk about the everyday, politics in the everyday.
Interesting. And that also means more money and it's more lucrative.
Yeah, because then the campaigns aren't just focused on elections, but on every little thing. Like, you know, if they're pushing for a particular policy agenda, then you'd have like campaigns for and against it. So you have all of these different people earning from that, etc. And then obviously politicians preparing for the next election. So already bringing out materials that burnish their reputation or sometimes revise their history so that they smell better, they look better for the public. Yeah.
What does this mean for the upcoming elections next year?
This would mean that we need to be quite wary of the things that we see online. And what I would say is that for people who are actually online, is that take a look again at the people that you follow. They might actually be snarky, funny, meme sharing accounts, but look at their history and see if they actually share political content, then they might actually be trolls. But that could be a bit difficult as well because they sometimes erase their histories.
It's quite hard to tell.
Yeah. And what's left there are the funny, snarky quotes, but you don't see the campaigns anymore.
Yes.
So they do that, they cover their tracks.
Okay.
But just be careful with that. But the other thing that we proposed, I think, in our research is that beyond looking at the content and regulating the content, because in some ways that's after the fact, they've already produced the disinformation. What we need to be working on is how you might disincentivize the whole field of disinformation production. How can we make it harder for people to do this kind of work? And so that's why in our project we talk about one of our policy solutions is campaign finance regulation. I mean, obviously we don't believe in regulating political speech because that's censorship, right? But what we might be able to regulate is how politicians spend in the digital, because we do that for the mainstream media, but in the digital they're quite free in terms of like they can even spend their whole campaign on the digital and not really disclose like did they pay this influencer, what was that campaign.
Right. So there's no regulation yet for this huge influential field.
Yeah, so there's no robust regulation there in contrast to all of the self-regulatory mechanisms in mainstream media, where we have like all of these ad councils, the PR councils who make sure that people follow the ethical line. So that's not really very much present in the realm of the digital. And the other thing that we propose as well is to regulate, and we know this is quite hard, the digital influencer industry. And it hasn't really been done in other countries as well. So, my co-author and I, Jonathan Ong from University of Amherst in Massachusetts, we've talked about this. Like, I wonder how possible it is to do something like this. But I think it's necessary and it's quite important to regulate or even have them self-regulate themselves, the digital influencers, and the work that they do. That's quite crucial.
All very new ideas,
Yeah.
and this is actually the first study that has sort of put all of this together.
Yeah.
How successful are these campaigns? And I ask this because do you foresee this going away or only getting bigger? Is it going to become a bigger industry? And do you foresee it, I guess, people eventually coming out and saying, I am the Olivia Pope, and it's no longer a shame game because of the success? So how successful is it, and where do you see this going?
I hesitate to use the word success because obviously in for every kind of campaign there will always be a winner and a loser.
And you have different measurements if a campaign is successful. Okay.
But if you say that it's lucrative, it is.
Okay.
And if that's their measure of success, whether they win or not with their campaigns, then they get what they want at the end of the day. So it's quite a lucrative industry at the moment because there are no checks. But if you make it a bit more transparent, then it becomes harder. And then in the end, if all these mechanisms are in place, then this could just be like digital political campaigning rather than disinformation, because there would be ethics that would be in place. So I think that's what we want to aim for, rather than for this to become even more normalized and to become even more lucrative.
Okay.
But the other thing to say as well is that it's very lucrative for the people at the top, but not necessarily for the people at the bottom. And so one of the other policy proposals that we have is to make sure that we have social safety nets in place for our digital workers. I mean, our government always, like, not just this government, but even previous governments, say that the digital industry is like one of our sunshine industries, right? So there's a lot of optimism about it, and rightly so. But at the same time, we need to make sure that those people who don't succeed very well in this industry are given some kind of support, so that they don't slip into the digital underground. They're not tempted.
That they need to do that. Okay.
So that's important. That's why we say as well that we shouldn't completely just demonize these information producers or trolls, because some of them are just there to find a living. So we kind of need to support them as well, so that they can move away from this kind of work.
And of course, I have to ask, which politicians use this sort of technique? Who are they?
Yeah, because of research ethics, we're not able to name the specific names, but what I will say is that it's not isolated
Okay.
to a particular camp.
Or a particular party.
Yeah, it happens across the political spectrum. And we have seen chief architects who work for politicians from different political parties across from the local to the national. So they have a mishmash of people that they support. So it's not isolated to a particular political party, but a huge number of people from different political inclinations use this kind of service.
At least tell me this, would you say it's majority, half, or minority of politicians who use this sort of techniques or styles?
It's a majority of them, and it's up and down, national to local. So it's, I mean, a lot of our focus is on the national, but even in local politics, there's some disinformation, even at the municipal, city level. Yeah, yeah. So that's how normalized
it is. And it's just pervasive at this point. Okay. Yes. Give us some good news. Okay, this is all so dark and gloomy and sad and frustrating in some sense. What's the good news? What are, I guess, what's positive learnings we can take from this? And I guess tips or advice for the netizens who are watching.
Right. The good news is that, and I mentioned this earlier, the digital influencers are really very good at bringing out people's sentiments and kind of encouraging them to speak their minds, to say what they feel. But that the problem is that they weaponize it, right? But if you use a little bit of imagination, you can turn it the other way around. These same people can be used for good to promote more positive kinds of campaigns because they know how to reach the people. And so that's something that we need to work on, I think, beyond stories of heroes and villains. Actually acknowledge the talents of these gay and transgender people who do digital influencer work and harness them for more positive projects because they know how to do it. And the skills are there. It's just that it's being used in problematic ways at the moment. But you can see how you can shift that for more positive projects. So that's the good news there. We have the skills, we're just using it for the wrong reasons. And at the end of the day, as media scholars, we believe that problems are not technological, but problems always go back to human beings. It's always embedded in the social, so the solutions as well are primarily social and human. So if we shift how we think about these people, then maybe we can use them for these better means. For our netizens, so to speak, what I mentioned earlier, look at the people whom you follow because these troll accounts are quite innocent looking, and so just be a bit more careful about, because you're supporting them by doing that, by following these accounts or incentivizing them to earn money. So you have these kinds of accounts. But the other thing as well to say is that there's this other account that gets lots and lots of followers. It's called a bikini troll account.
Okay.
So these are accounts, usually the ones that get a lot of following, really funny, are accounts where you have a photo of like a very pretty middle-class Filipina girl in a bikini.
Interesting.
So that's why we call them the bikini trolls. So, and a lot of these accounts get lots of followers. And the chief architects who run them, they actually say that they get solicited a lot, that those accounts get solicited a lot.
Okay.
So they get a lot of like unwanted photos.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So, so don't follow those, I would say. So
and
just
they're
be
also
careful.
used for politics.
Yes, they're used for politics.
Okay.
Because they get so many friends just by using bikini troll accounts. And then obviously you get to reach out to these people and promote your messages.
Yes or no, engage with fake accounts or trolls?
That's interesting because my own academic thinking about this has shifted over. I mean, if you see my writing, my writings, I kind of like move to and fro. I would say if it's like a paid troll, there's really no point in engaging with them. But also I understand that, ideally, and I've written about this, that ideally you would want to engage with supporters of other political camps, but also we know in practice how tiring that can be. And so I think instead of putting a lot of the responsibility on our social media users. We need to fix the structural, and again, make it less toxic by disincentivizing trolling. And in some ways, hopefully, that will shift the environment in our social media. Because before this, Filipino social media was known to be, very...
It's not this toxic.
Yeah, it followed our rules of reciprocity and, our particular Filipino values. And then that's shifted over the last couple of years. So yeah, and it's the structure, the normalization of deception work has had a lot to do with that. And on the level of the individual, I think you can only do so much. So we really need to address the structural issues behind it.
And compared to the rest of the world, is this something unique to the Philippines, or is this something we're seeing across the
Right.
globe?
This is another, I think, very important point to make, is that obviously this is happening in many places in the world. I'm sure we know about like Cambridge Analytica in the US, in the UK, but even beyond that, in India with Narendra Modi, in Turkey with Erdogan, and even in Eastern Europe, you have all of these things happening. And what we would say is that on one hand, we would need global solutions, right? And people are doing that. But I think it's important to say as well that we need bespoke or local solutions, because a lot of the techniques that they use are rooted within particular cultures. And so the solution, therefore, for the Philippines, you'd have some of the adopt some of the global solutions, but also like look at our specific context and try to solve our specific problems. But to say as well that other countries who sometimes don't really pay attention to the Philippines, I mean, they talked about populism and disinformation when Trump won, when Brexit prevailed back in the UK. But even before that, we were having problems already, right? And so I think the Western, the established Western democracies have to keep an eye on what's happening in the developing world, in a sense, because
there's a lot to learn.
We are sitting on a stockpile of digital weapons that we can sell to them. Yeah, so they need to also not just focus on what's happening in their part of the world, but see what we're doing here, so because eventually it might bite them. Yeah.
It's an important note to end on. Jason, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Congratulations to you and your team for such important work.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming and speaking to us.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. And that was Jason Cabañas with a very important study on architects of disinformation here in the Philippines. I'm Natasha Gutierrez. Thank you for watching.